Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are going to start. When the music stops, we shall start. The music has stopped, so we shall start serious business. So, first of all, it's to welcome all of you to this seminar. The seminar is on what we call the rationalizing by-elections, rethinking the cost of democracy and the role of money. Those of us who don't have a lot of money sometimes want to talk about money a lot. So we are going to be talking about money this time. But the way we are going to be talking about it is to talk about it within the context of what does it mean for our electoral democracy and electoral processes as a country. As you all know, the topic of money and how money plays a role in our politics is a very touchy topic, but also an interesting one. But it's also an interesting topic. And so to spend some time trying to understand how it plays out is important. So to do this, we have our colleagues from the Alliance for Finance Monitoring who will be giving us a perspective on this whole question of money and the role of money and how we should think about money and its relationships to electoral democracy. Because as you all know, resources are important, but in many ways, they have also been very instrumental in redefining our democratic processes, both in country, but also out of this country. So in a sense, we see this as important, especially as we move into 2026, when Uganda is going to again be doing something, when it's going to be holding an election. I don't want to say doing something like an election, but when it is going to be holding an election. And so it's important that, of course, we invest time in appreciating what this means for us as a country, but also for those of us who are interested in knowledge production. How can we document what this is and how money shapes democratic processes, and also what it means. With what I'll call physical extravagance. Now I'm using a language that is a bit veiled, but I'm sure you understand that when money becomes a critical problem, a big issue. And for the recent past, we have seen quite a lot of work that has been done in investing resources in different ways. So we really want to go a little bit in understanding this. Our colleague Henry, who will be speaking today, is going to be talking about money and by-elections and all that, but also sort of going a bit further to say this electoral financing environment that we have as a country, how can that be structured differently? And so things like political party financing, electoral violence and the expenditures associated to it, donor funding and accountability issues, issues around the campaign expenditure at local and national levels, are all going to be questions we shall be spending some time on this afternoon. So, ladies and gentlemen, making a presentation to help us to shape the discussion a little bit much more sharply is going to be Henry. Henry Muguzi is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Finance Monitoring, and he has really been engaging on this question for quite some time. We have also got Professor Moses Kisa from North Carleton University. He's also online. He's one of the people who has also studied these questions very, very well, and he will be speaking to us also. So we are in very good hands in terms of this work. Now, this work is really part of a larger project that we've been running called Navigating the 2026 Elections in Uganda, which tries to understand what is it that we can actually do to understand, to document, to look into what 2026 would look like. We don't want to first wait to write a postmortem, but we want to accompany the process by understanding how things are going. Before we got many challenges from the United States of America, we thought we would write a book. Now we are wondering if we'll write a book, but we shall try and write a book out of this process. But at least for now, we are doing these seminars. We are writing what we call sense-making seminar series papers, which are basically papers to help us to shape each of the themes. We will be also communicating with our authors who will be selected to, first of all, develop some chapters. They will also be sharing. We have had a number of interesting seminars already. We started with one where we mapped out the terrain. That publication is out. We looked at youth and elections. That publication is out. We looked at gender and elections. That publication is out. Now we are looking at money. Maybe next month or the other month we may look at the elections and security, but we are still talking to our partners so we can see how to deal with that. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome all of you, those online and those of you who are here physically, who come to this. So without any further ado, there are not too many ceremonies here. We are just going to ask Henry to speak to us for the next maybe 30 or so minutes, and at some point he will pause. We shall then get Moses to do his rejoinder. We know he has to leave a few minutes before 4 o'clock, and then for us we shall continue the conversation. And we always have tea and coffee. We shall drink tea and coffee and continue talking until we are tired, but maybe by around 4:30 to 5 we shall have finished and we'll close. So I want to thank all of you for making time, and welcome to CBR. CBR used to be a very quiet environment. We used to be a very quiet one, but now I have to continuously apologize for the signs of progress and the sounds of progress around us, because people are building and there are many lorries and many things banging, but hopefully we shall be able to listen to each other well. So thank you very much. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this platform. As introduced, my name is Henry Muguzi. I am the Executive Director of the Alliance. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Finance Monitoring. The Alliance for Finance Monitoring is a coordinating platform of NGOs and civil society activists that follow the money in politics and public institutions, looking for traces of corruption and trying to come up with policy interventions that we think would address the issues at hand. We live in a country, ladies and gentlemen, that suffers from an epidemic of highly commercialized politics. The cost of politics as we head into 2026 has gone so high up that if you're not super rich, you are advised not to even dream of becoming a political unelected leader. And this is not a good place to be at. And so this is why I'm here. So we are working on a paper. This paper, excerpts of which I'm sharing with you, is trying to understand and make sense of the by-elections and the money we spend on them, and try to propose alternatives that we think should be considered. And we intend to push this all the way. When the paper is finally published, we'll have policy briefs that we shall use to engage and sell the agenda as we get into the next parliament, so that we avoid the recurrence of what we have seen. So this paper is titled Rationalizing By-Elections, Rethinking the Cost of Democracy and the Role of Money in Uganda's Electoral Politics. So, at a glance, since between 2021 and 2025, sorry about that, we have conducted 13 by-elections. And the cause for those by-elections has been either death of the office holder or a court decision. I also want to submit to you that these by-elections, in their very nature, have a wider political impact than merely replacing individual members. And maybe I can explain this. You see, by-elections will tell you the mood in the arena, so you can use them as a testing ground. They are also used as a testing ground for political parties to gauge where they are. But also they are testing grounds for those that are intending to aspire for elective politics, to test themselves. But also they help us to identify the areas of weaknesses for our democracy, which then we can address. So by-elections mean much more than just replacing individual members. And why this matters? The reason we think we should rationalize, even consider thinking, reflecting, spending time like as we are doing now on discussing whether or not to rationalize by-elections, we believe strongly that conducting general elections and, presidential, parliamentary, every 5 years is cost effective. But by-elections, you can conduct them as regularly as possible, depending on how the need arises. And like I said in the beginning, we are counting 13, and we could have a 14th one. if Nalukola does not succeed in his appeal. We are also submitting that the cost of filling a political vacancy during a by-election is not inevitable. So conducting by-election should not never be treated as this kind of thing that is inevitable, we must hold it or we die. And I'll tell you why. We argue that once the party's flag bearer is voted into office, by default, that party receives a mandate of 5 years to serve the constituency. So why would we then take away that mandate? Ordinarily, in the true sense of the word, it would follow that if NUP, for example, held the mandate in the Kawempe North, why not ask NUP to nominate a person that will eventually takes over from the dead, instead of going full circle? Because even when you go through what you went through, the spending, we were told that the Prime Minister descended into Kawempe North with $1 billion shillings. I will talk about that later. The brutalization that we saw, the bastardization of democracy, and the effects thereof. We wouldn't have to go through these if we had rationalized by-elections. And we are saying that by-elections are also unpredictable at times or most of the times. And what you get to see is that they distort the optimal allocation of state resources. In the circumstances where you don't have to continuously work with supplementary budgets, you are working with the resources that are limited. So every time a by-election has to be conducted, resources have to be pulled from a certain vote, compromising what it was supposed to do in order to repurpose it for by-elections. We think this can be avoided. But also by-elections have been used as grounds to bastardize rather than improve democracy. I'll speak about these again. So these are the by-elections we have conducted. We started with Kayunga. If you did not know what a zombie election looks like, you just have to go back and play the images in Kayunga. You will see what we call a zombie election. NUP lost that to NRM. So then we went to Omoro, we went to Sorot East, Serere, Buchimbiri, Busongora, South Bukedeya, LOC5. Every time I mention this by-election of Bukedeya, I feel shivers in my body because I don't want to even remember that it happened on our soil. Because even the president had to come out and say, I want you to do these things, but this time around you went beyond. Then we went to Oyam, Hoima, Dokoro, Kisoro, and but the one thing you see here is that out of the 13, it was in 4 cases where the seat lost, exchanged hands. In Kayunga, NUP lost to NRM. In Sorot East, FDC lost to NRM. In Oyam, NRM lost to UPC. And in Dokoro District Woman, FDC lost to UPC. In cases such as Serere, NRM lost to NRM because the individual that was lost to is NRM leaning. But also in Kisoro, NRM lost to NRM. So this is a distorted graph. It doesn't make sense. Let me speak about the logistical burden of by-elections on the electorate, on you and I. These are reports from the Electoral Commission. 600 million was used in Kayunga by the Electoral Commission to conduct that by-election. 400 in Omoro. So you get to see that for the district for the constituency by-election, the spending is between 400 to 450 million, depending on the what's it called, the constituency, the location of the constituency. But for the district, spending goes to 600. So a total of 6 billion and 80 million is what the Electoral Commission says they have spent on conducting those 13 by-elections. But you see, when you look at this, you might think, oh, 6 billion is something small, until you get into the real cost, the real burden that you face as a citizenry. And here is the real burden. You have the sitting president going into every by-election to canvass for votes for the NRM flag bearer. Now, we state here that while the exact daily costs are not publicly detailed, available data indicates that maintaining President Museveni's convoy during campaigns related travels involves a significant public expenditure, and I shall give you the numbers. There are concerns also about the fiscal responsibility and the separation of the state and party resources. Often we speak about misuse of government resources on partisan politics. There must be a limit. We should be able to draw the line between the president, who is the president of the country, but also the chairman of a party that is vying for an election. Here, this is a kind of a synopsis of the expenses of the president. So when the president goes for the by-election, the irreducible minimum we have been given, which is not always disclosed, suggests that the expenditures range between 250 million to 300 million per day. And this goes into fuel, maintenance of the vehicles, allowances for the entourage, and other logistical expenses. This is the irreducible minimum, the one that they can disclose comfortably. So if this is what he spends, 250, so we got the mean, between 250 and 300, we got the mean and multiplied it by the 13 by-elections. And we came up with a conservative figure of 3 billion that the president has spent on just going for those by-elections and to campaign for the NRM candidate. But there are also other concerns. I talked about the concerns of blending state resources with NRM party activities, questioning the justification of such expenditures in a country facing various economic challenges amid an external debt that, as you all know or would want to know, is almost reaching an unbearable level. When it comes to the misuse of state resources for partisan activities, which is a concern, we are looking at, there is a debate on this, but also we are looking at leveraging government funds and assets for party-specific activities, which blurs the line between state functions and party politics, raising concerns about fairness, transparency, and accountability in the utilization of those resources. You can now not tell where the money comes from that facilitates the president to go and engage in a very partisan activity. But we also try to look at other costs related to the involvement of other government officials in the by-election. As you know, when there is a by-election, if you are a minister and you don't want to be reshuffled in the next reshuffle, you must be seen to be on the ground, or else you are going to be categorized as not being with us. So, we are looking at Madame Majegere, the Prime Minister. She's been a permanent presence in all the by-elections. And there are also instances where she has told the president that because the NRM Secretary General does not speak Luganda, he should be restricted to by-elections in northern Uganda, but these ones in the south, he cannot do a good job. So she shoulders all the responsibility. And then we have the other ministers. We also have the other DCs. And of course the other security operatives, all of whom descend into the by-election. Let us get into what that means. So for her transportation, for her security, for the her per diem and allowances, and other logistics that would mean she goes in there, warms up the area, combs the area, mobilizes, organizes. She's reported to be pulling out between 800 million and 1 billion per by-election. In Kawempe, she descended on Kawempe North with 1 billion. And this money is allegedly drawn from your state house budget, a classified budget. And remember, for the longest of time, we have always said that this house, called the State House, has become a burden to Ugandans. Because ordinarily, State House is a house where the man or woman who occupies or reside with his or her spouse. And the expenditures thereof should be modest expenditures. When you look at the budget allocations, that's where most of the money is directed. There is hardly a supplementary budget that is passed without supplementary budget to the State House. It has become a burden. But the reason it continues to burden us is because this money has to be raised. Your money. So we are thinking that if the Prime Minister has been forking out between 800 million and 1 billion on every by-election, then for the 13 by-elections she has spent an irreducible minimum of 11 billion. And then comes other ministers. They must be transported. They use government vehicles and government fuel, which is your money, my money. They use security, the security around them, deployment of personnel to ensure their safety. Per diems and allowances, payments of staff and officials accompanying the minister, and other logistics. Because when they go in, they must meet elders, mobilize, organize. We've been informed that every time the minister goes down, each of those ministers must draw from the ministry between 20 and 40 million. And when we try to estimate a conservative figure of 5 ministers. I think it was in Omoro where we counted close to 10 ministers present on the ground. So we think that for the 13 by-elections, if every minister was drawing out the mean between 20 and 40 million, 1.9 billion has been spent. This is all your money, my money. And then our good friends, the RDCs, the same. So the RDC pulls out between 3 to 6 million when they are going for the election. Basically, accommodation, meals, and incidental expenses, including transport. Even when they use government vehicles, they need fuel and maintenance costs for those vehicles, plus the security staff accompanying them. That is the figure that the figure that the irreducible minimum we can lay our hands on. So when we estimated the total aggregate Ugandans have spent on the by-elections, the 13 by-elections that have been conducted, we discovered that it boils down to an irreducible minimum of 23 billion. That's why we said this money, first of all, they are quite costly, but also this is money we could avoid. And that's how we arrive at that expenditure. We compute what the Electoral Commission reports to have spent on the 13 by-elections. We compute the expenses made by the President. We compute expenses of the Prime Minister. We compute expenses of ministers, RDCs. We have not included the party, because that's a private organization, entity. So here are the concerns and criticisms of by-elections in Uganda. What have we seen? Number one, we have not seen an election that stands out to have passed the test of a democratic elections. At most, we have seen zombie elections. And zombie elections, we are referring to the living dead of an election recognizable only in form, but devoid of substance. These have only served to entrench zombie democracy. And what we are seeing is nothing but authoritarianism cloaked in the garb of democracy. We cannot spend 23 billion to get this. This does not justify it. Number two, we have seen a bunch, we've seen a horde of disenfranchised voters. Many of these by-elections have registered very low voter turnout. And the one thing that stands out is that the civil and political rights of these citizens to participate in choosing the officials to govern them have been violated with reckless abandon. As a matter of fact, many don't vote. Recently in Kawempe, the voter turnout was at less than 20%. And so we argue that the costs of conducting by-elections are not commensurate with the gains thereof. And we are saying it is imposing an unavoidable burden on the electors. This is where we premise our argument for rationalization. But we have also recorded other unwanted practices such as electoral violence. We have seen the militarization of polling stations, the intimidation that follows it, and other practices. So your money has gone and purchased the electoral violence. It has also purchased electoral fraud. Ballot stuffing, interference with vote counting, bribing electoral officials, name it. All these practices have been synonymous with the by-elections, but also the misuse of state resources for partisan political activities. So Ugandans have purchased taxpayers' money has been used to purchase Mamba, to chase those wrong elements that want to undermine the sovereignty of the country. Why do you take it to a by-election? What is it doing there? Isn't this misuse? That you pull out money from a national vote to go and campaign, spending national resources on partisan activities. We are calling that misuse. So here I reaffirm the arguments in support of rationalization of by-elections. The first one is that in the majority of the by-elections, the candidate from the incumbent party, so the party that was holding the position, its candidate is the one that again won. So what was the rationale? What was the rationale of then going through the whole cycle of spending and voting and whipping people and battering and so on? So which is why we argue that once the party's flag bearer has been voted, that party has received a mandate of 5 years to serve the constituency. We are arguing and trying to convince colleagues in government that policymakers that there is therefore no need of a by-election. Let the party that held that position be asked to nominate another candidate. These things happen in countries where they work with the lists. Once one person is dead, you go back to the list and pick and replace. But we're also saying that where the position was held by an independent candidate, then the second best candidate would automatically take the seat. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Put this down. So the second best candidate would automatically the seat. If we did this, then we would encourage competition. Because you know that even when you emerge second, there would be a chance you can become. This is how we grow democracy. We are also saying that spending that money, as we have seen, could have been avoided. The fact that could have been avoided, spending that money would have been avoided, we think is a shame in a country where other important sectors remain grossly underfunded. And one of the things I highlight here is the fact that to date, as we speak, we need 30 billion. We are looking for 30 billion to build a bunker to house the only proposed radiotherapy machine. Finance does not have the money, so they have claimed. And people have been left to die. If you cannot take your patient outside, they will die. But we are comfortable finding the monies I talked about to fund by-elections. Secondly, you know that we've not been able to hold LOC1 elections with all the advantages and purposes that the LOC ones serve, LOC local council committees serve. That exercise requires between 35 and 40 billion, and the ministry does not have it. So how are we allocating our resources? So let me now zero in on the role of money in Uganda's electoral politics, because that is another concern, and the other side of why we are where we are. I should state that money is essential for the healthy functioning of political parties, elections, and democracy. Without money, democracy cannot stand. So we need money. Democracies need money, all right? So democracies need money. Political parties need money to build and maintain a broad base of operations, to recruit members, to formulate policies, and effectively communicating with the public. Political parties, ladies and gentlemen, play a very strategic role, which is a public utility. We have charged them with a very strategic responsibility. They are the ones that are supposed to identify future leaders, groom them, and then present them to us, upon which we shall then cast the vote. But they also aggregate our views and interests. They are the ones that help us to marshal a stronger voice in holding governments to account. So all of these things require that a political party has offices, they have staff, researchers. These things cost money. So they cannot exist without money. So money is essential for political parties. But it's also essential in allowing political parties and candidates to participate in election campaigns. We have an election coming in the next 6 months. The candidates and the political parties that will participate in it need the money. So I just wanted to make sure that is clear, that we cannot have democracy without money. Money is essential. However, in a country like Uganda, where you can see money, where you can say that money no longer just talk, it shouts, that becomes a point of concern. The ballot, as we speak, has been commoditized. If you speak with quite a number of voters today, they are warming up to receive as much as they can. In fact, not to receive, but to harvest as much as they can from the candidates and political parties that are going to participate in the campaigns. Although voter bribery is prohibited, if you read the Presidential Elections Act, Parliamentary Elections Act, in practice, there are many forms of inducements and clientelism used to buy voter support, and the law cannot touch them. We haven't failed to enforce those provisions. In fact, they have proven unenforceable. And the third one is that there are suspicions that the ruling party often raids the national treasury to finance partisan political activities or any other maneuvers at the expense of service delivery to the city. They were alleging that the money that came to the party came from Bank of Uganda because it was smelling new and it had labels of Bank of Uganda. And the only customer, Bank of Uganda has one customer. The customer of Bank of Uganda is government. So if government went and drew money from the Bank of Uganda, then how did it end up in FDC? You have heard the stories. So we think that this is actual. The raiding of national treasury is actually something that happens. So what must be done? Number one, we believe that we need to come up with ways and means of curbing the high cost of politics. The cost of politics, ladies and gentlemen, is a point of concern to our democratization process. Number two, we need to find ways of combating corruption in political finance. Political finance, by its nature, attracts many acts of corruption. Aside from the usual one we know of vote buying, most of the monies that end up financing election campaigns, ladies and gentlemen, come from not clean sources. It actually comes from dark sources because nobody will tell you where the money comes from. But you know it comes from dark sources, and dark sources are always dirty. And the reason they are dirty is that most of this is proceeds of crime, including corruption. But also those who provide the money then come back and they capture. They capture those that have been bankrolled, and they end up influencing the outcomes of public procurement processes. We need to address the very weak political finance regulatory framework. Ladies and gentlemen, Uganda suffers from a lack of guardrails for financing politics, for financing election campaigns, for financing political parties. What we have in place is not enough. We do not have we have a very weak regulator of political finance, because apparently today the responsibility to regulate political finance is heaped on the Electoral Commission. But the Electoral Commission, which is the shoulders the burden of political finance regulator, is also burdened with a very humongous task of organizing and conducting elections. If you go to the Electoral Commission, the Department of Legal, where this role is designated, has a personnel of not more than 4. We have tried to request for information about the reports from political parties that receive public funding, and every time we have requested, and we've been requesting since 2015, those the requests have not been responded to, and we discovered later that actually when the political parties submit this information, they submit it in hard copies, and it is heaped in a store, thrown in a store. There is no person to go there and sift through and make sense of what is submitted. Personnel, very weak regulatory institution. And the other thing that must be done is to make sure that politics is taken away from being a preserve of the super rich. Because many young men and women who have the capability to govern even better and serve better are denied the opportunity because they cannot have the money that is needed. Today we are estimating that if you're going to contest for a member of parliament for 2016, the nominations of which will happen in August, you should have a war chest of at least 600 million. This is not simple money. And the problem with the politics is that when you're going to start spending on politics, you should have reached a level where you can get the 600 million and throw them in the lake and not feel anything. Otherwise, you're going to develop heart attack because you have no guarantees that will be the eventual winner. And the other point of concern is that in Uganda, money is used to control voter consent. You see, we highlight these articles, Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also Article 25 of the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. According to those articles, elections cannot be genuine if they do not reflect the free expression of the will of electors. The challenge with money is that once money comes into the picture, the electors are going to vote not based on their free expression or will, but on the directions given by the one that has provided the money. And it means therefore that the one who has money is controlling the consent of voters, which contravenes these fundamental principles of genuine elections. So if you look at elections in Uganda from 2011, 16, 21, they are not what you can actually refer to as an expression of the will of the people. But rather you can simply put, they've been an expression of the power of money. So we are arguing here that when money manufactures voter consent, so you're using money to manufacture voter consent, it creates what we are calling cosmetic democracy, of which I referred to earlier on in other activist metaphors as a zombie democracy. And once this happens, it has the potential to weaken the state, and the weakened state will often crumble into captivity under the weight of corruption. Because those benefactors that bankrolled the party that won, or the candidates that won, will determine what those candidates, those leaders will eventually do when they assume office. As they say, who pays the piper always calls the tune. So we are also reinforcing that by stating that when money is used to procure electoral victory, when money is used to procure electoral victory, the principle of civic participation gets eroded, and democracy cannot survive if there is no meaningful, and I should have put that in quote-unquote meaningful or underlined, meaningful citizen participation. And of course elections then have become delegitimate when the consent of voters is either bought or manufactured. So these are my closing thoughts, our closing thoughts. We face a situation where there is lack of political will and or reluctance to enact and enforce laws that can insulate politics against the vagaries of monetized politics of money and its necessary concomitant of political corruption. And this is the basis of our call to action, the call for rationalization of by-elections, but also the call to put in place guardrails to regulate the use of money in our elections. So deliberate effort must be done to curb the cost of politics in order to bring it to a level where all citizens have an opportunity to participate either as candidates or voters. So political party leaders, this goes to them, they should also embrace the principles of openness, transparency, and accountability in the management of party finances if they are to cement their status as governments in waiting. We do not understand why political parties don't lead by example and do not want to stand out as islands of integrity by exercising that which we think is deficient in the party that is in the government. And if they're going to be taken seriously, we need to start seeing them being open, transparent, and accountable, especially in utilization of monies. It should be clear where the monies they are using is coming from. It should be clear to the electorate how much they spend. It should also be clear how that money is, decisions to spend that money are taken. So these are our closing thoughts. Thank you very much, Richard, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very insightful. Those numbers that you threw out are quite scary. But we would like now to transit very quickly to Professor Kisa Moses, who is online because he's in, is it North Carolina or North Carolina? It depends on where he went to school. But he's in one of those universities, and he's going to be speaking to us shortly, and then we shall have a general discussion. Is Moses ready to speak? Over to you, Moses. A camera. Are we able to see him? Moses, are you talking? We can't hear you. It looks like Moses is talking. Oh, Moses, wait, we have a challenge. These guys, they always wait and then they start looking for you. What are you looking for? The mic is here. Okay, we are now more or less there. Apologies. Please go ahead. You hear me now? Yes, we hear you, but we will sort ourselves out. Yes, we can hear you now. Okay. Although there is an echo now. There is an echo. is the mic on? Yes, okay. So let's continue. I think Kisa will come online shortly. I think they didn't test him. They are now trying to test him. And it's too late. And so we shall just continue. If you have any comments, questions, reactions, I at 10 to 3, so they're about 20 minutes. I hope they connect him in the next 5 minutes so we can see how to do that. But reactions, yes. Microphone is here.
Thank you very much, our speaker. These are shocking realities, but not at all surprising, because we see this every day. And I have two comments. One, to whom are these recommendations directed? Who has the will? There's a time where some consultations in the villages, and we took soap, small pieces of soap and matchbox and all, and were asking people, how can you sell your vote for a matchbox? And their answer, only time, this is the only time I'm going to eat. Because once these people go to parliament or local councils or district councils, we shall never see them again. And that also went to, we asked ourselves, where does all these large sums go? They are definitely not going to the poor. It's like the rich are financing elections, but the money is going back to the rich. We see, for example, when you observe, women are getting matchbox, one piece of soap, 1,000, and so on. So the question is, as you follow this money, where does it end? Is it dark to dark? Of course, the symbolism of dark is not a good thing. You might have to look for another word, because as we now struggle against the global anti-blackness, anything that is dark is called bad and so on. And that takes the whole kind of the African, people of African descent. So that, where does the money go actually? Because we don't see it. We don't see that, for example, it has gone to village X, and that, you know, maybe people have, I don't know, done what and what. In the villages, I just passed through some village in Isinjiro. People are still getting water, this open source where you stand in the same water and the cows are also standing in the same water. That's the kind of life that many of the people are in. And where is that money? Thank you very much. This is so revealing, but very, very worrying, especially for young people who have a long future ahead. Thank you.
Where does the money go? You have to tell us, because when we count the matchboxes, by the time they make 1 billion shillings of matchboxes, there must be very many. Please go ahead.
Yes, good
afternoon. You can introduce yourself. The last speaker is Professor Josephine Aichire, research fellow here at CBR. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nachimuri Maureen from the Uganda National Medical Alliance for Prisoners Support. Mr. Henry, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, because it is today that you've opened my eyes. And mine is just a recommendation that we need civic education in the community, right from the They call it Omuntu Wawansi. Because in my village, you just have to buy wallet, whether of 500 shillings, and people will go and vote for you. So I think we need a lot of civic education. Because if we are speaking about 227 billion, it is really a large amount of money. And also we need to, because you said that you were requesting for reports, but I think we need to ask for accountability of this money. Because in my observation in the government, the more you ask for accountability, they can never give you a straight answer. But since you're here, we really need accountability for this money. Thank you so much.
One more.
Okay. Thank you, CBR, for hosting us. Should I dial? My name is. I work with the Uganda National NGO Forum, and thank you, ACFIM, for the research. I have like 3 questions. One is on the. I think I heard you at the beginning of your presentation indicating that one of the ways to rationalize the cost of by-elections is to ask the party whose candidate either has been disqualified or the candidate has died to nominate a replacement without necessarily going to a by-election. So the question is around the fact that even if candidates for political parties represent political parties, they are elected on their individual merit. Does that in a way disfranchise the voters? But also, what is the place for independent candidates who are not affiliated to political parties? What is the alternative there? The second one is the cost that you highlighted for especially the president and the ministers when they are campaigning for their party candidates. Do our laws guard against the use of state resources? Because I understand that political parties are supposed to be filing returns with the Electoral Commission on how much money they use during campaigns and how much money and where that money is coming from. Is there a place in which either public interest litigation where we find if we can prove that that money is taxpayers' money in courts of law, that we have some remedies there? The other one is still on by-elections. You highlighted costs by ministers, by the president, but we also see that even opposition political parties, when you have a by-election like we had in Kawempe, you would have Chagulanyi go to Kawempe, you would have sitting members of parliament or heads of other opposition political parties traveling. Do we have figures on how much is actually spent? And is there a case or are there implications on how much is spent on the by-elections by other opposition political parties that might not necessarily be public money, but is there a case to be made around how much is spent during those elections? Then the last one is on the correlation between how much money is spent and the electoral outcomes. We've seen that the attrition rate, for example, in parliament is 70%. But how strong is the correlation? Is it true that the candidate that spends the highest amount of money will almost always win? And what are the chances?
Moses, are you able to speak to us now? Let's test.
That's if you can hear me.
You can hear us.
Very loud and clear. But
we can hear you now. We heard you hearing us, so we are hearing you also. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, ED. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, and I'll be very brief. I'll make some quick comments since time is not very friendly. I want to start by thanking my brother Henry Muguzi for sharing those insights and very interesting findings. I know that Henry and his organization have been working on this issue for quite some time, and I have had conversations with them in the past and worked a little bit with their work. So I'm glad Henry is still committed to this subject because it's very, very important, and not many people are actually paying attention on what otherwise is a very, very critical aspect of our politics. I don't want to spoil Henry's very elaborate and informative presentation. I'll only add a few things and emphasize some points that he already alluded to. But first of all, let me say that it's very important for us to actually have a rigorous and systematic study, an ongoing study of the issue of money in Ugandan politics, which we haven't been doing. And ACFIM has made an effort, but it's not enough. I hope that CBR can take more interest in this, Richard, because we hold elections after 5 years, and then in between, as Henry very elaborately pointed out, we have so many by-elections. But of course, we also have politics every day, including by political parties, by different political office holders. So we need a continuous assessment, analysis, and evaluation of money in Ugandan politics. And as many of us who are involved in this business know, it's not easy to conduct research, good research, and it takes a lot of effort, a lot of resources, but it's necessary, especially in this case of understanding how money and finance influence our electoral processes and our democratic trajectory. I wanted to underline one aspect from Henry's presentation, which is the overall expenditures we see in elections. Now, Henry laid emphasis on by-elections, and I think he makes a very, very compelling argument about these by-elections are often violent and very expensive. Is it worth holding them, actually? Is it worth having by-elections? Isn't there another way of filling those vacant positions and seats instead of having another violent and expensive election? And I think Ugandans need to have that conversation, and I'm glad that ACFIM and Henry have raised that question because it's extremely important, and we haven't really talked about it much in the past. But by-elections aside, I think if we take the overall picture of elections or politics more broadly, and money on the other hand, we know quite a bit about how much the government spends, the Electoral Commission. We know a little bit about how much is spent by State House and by different government agencies in ways that have a bearing on the elections. But we don't know how much individual aspirants for offices actually spend. We don't know their sources. We don't know the manner in which they raise the funds that they spend in elections. And this is very important because Uganda, even though we have party politics and platforms that go beyond individuals, nevertheless, our politics very much remains fundamentally individualistic. So how do individuals raise the money that they spend in elections, and how much do they spend? This is a question that ACFIM has tried to answer, and I and some other colleagues did try to answer that question as well when we studied the 2011 and 2016 elections. And we published a big working paper which is available online that compares Tanzania and Uganda. This problem of money in politics and campaign financing is not only a Ugandan problem. It's a problem across the African continent. And we found some very interesting parallels between Tanzania and Uganda. That working paper, for those who may be interested, is available online. You can find it. So the issue of individual sources of campaign financing and how much they spend is very important, because I think it has two very, very critical implications. Implication number one is the possibility of Uganda ending with what I can characterize as plutocracy or plutocratic politics. What does plutocracy mean? It means the rule by the rich, or oligarchic rule. If money, as Henry has quite compellingly showed, is a very big driving force, and elections are ever becoming expensive, individuals have to raise huge sums of money. When I conducted interviews with MPs back in 2018, 2019 about how much they had spent in the 2016 elections, I was surprised that an independent MP from somewhere in southwestern Uganda he told me that the much he could recall spending, only that he could recall spending, was about 500 million. It's possible that he spent 1 billion shillings. This was in the 2016 elections. So raising 1 billion shillings to finance an election is quite a monumental feat. So where does somebody get 1 billion shillings to spend on a parliamentary race? I think we're moving in a direction where only those who can be able to raise 1 billion shillings can be MPs. In other words, we shall have MPs that are either plutocrats, oligarchs, people with money, or they get that money from oligarchs, from rich, powerful individuals and companies. Which brings me to the second implication of unregulated runaway money in politics and elections, which is the quality of political leaders and the caliber of politicians we end up with. I think it's quite well known in Ugandan circles that MPs get into parliament and most of them are so financially stressed, they are hugely indebted, they are desperate to recoup what they spent or to get money so they can pay the debts they incurred when they ran for office. So what are some of the things they do? A, they increase their own remuneration and emoluments. They have the power and authority to increase their pay. So they use that power to pay themselves as much as possible so they can, put off some of the financial pressure and stress that would have resulted from an expensive election they were involved in. So that is a big problem, because then you have MPs who are eager to make up the financial mess and cover themselves once they get into parliament. But the other thing is this, that have MPs, and this is the policy implication that Henry was speaking to. You have MPs that are potentially compromised by certain sources of finance that would have financed their entry into parliament. The study we did on Tanzania and Uganda, we were able to make the argument that there is a potential quid pro quo, meaning that individual aspirants for political office, especially MPs, are financed by certain powerful individuals and companies. And then in exchange for being financed to enter parliament, they can pass favorable policies and laws. And we were interested especially in understanding how campaign financing has a link with revenue policy, with politics of revenue, particularly when it comes to issues to do with tax exemptions for companies and corporations. Now, we did not find a very convincing smoking gun, but I think that's something worth investigating. Is there a link between the way politicians are financed to attain political office, especially MPs on the one hand, and the policies that are passed by Parliament, but also supported by the presidency, the president and cabinet, particularly in the area of the economy, especially with regards to revenue collection, revenue policy, revenue mobilization, and the issue of tax exemptions that has become such a big deal in recent times. There are other things I could have spoken to, but I don't want to go on for too long, Richard, Edie. So I'm going to actually stop here and again thank Henry for sharing his very insightful presentation with us. And of course, to thank you all in the audience, in person, as well as online, for your very kind audience and for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. Richard has stepped out a little bit, so I will in for him. Thank you for those insightful ideas, which have gone a long way in enriching the study, the paper we are developing. So we still had comments, so should we address those comments? There's one comment there.
Thank you, Henry, for sharing with us. I think for me, one of the comments I have, it's also on the recommendations that we are proposing, especially if you look at the recommendation number 1, the need to curb the high costs of politics. I would request that you share with us, looking at the citizen, what can be done so that we are able to curb this cost. And then the other, I think I'm seeking clarity in respect to the alternative that we are proposing instead of undertaking a by-election. Of course, one of the proposals you have highlighted where it's at a party level and in the instances of death, where we are proposing maybe the other party can propose an alternative. But in your presentation, there were 2 alternatives for that, in the event of death, but also in the event that there is a court decision. So in the instances of if we are to reflect with Kawempe North, where they're declaring the seat vacant, what alternative can be done instead of a by-election? Because in this instance, there is no death, that maybe the party proposes an alternative, the seat is vacant, the different political parties as well as independents that participated in this race. What alternative instead? Thank you.
So, yes, thank you. My name is Eric from the Human Rights Center, Uganda. Thank you very much, Henry, for your presentation. From your presentation, it's certainly true that the public expenditure on elections, and here speaking by elections, is alarming. That of the candidates, as stated by Professor Kisa, also seems to be alarming. What I'm not sure about is whether or not the expenditure by the Electoral Commission is alarming. Given the amount of money that we spend on other public services, it does not seem like much of a concern. It seems like a necessity for the Electoral Commission. And the other thing I was wondering about is whether or not some of the other challenges that you've mentioned are unique to by-elections, or they apply generally to elections in Uganda. Would doing away with by-elections solve some of the challenges that you've mentioned? Challenges around violence, challenges around over-expenditure that you've highlighted, and that Professor Kisa has also highlighted. One of the things I would invite us to consider in terms of by-elections is what courts seemed to have started doing in 2016, but they seemed to have walked back the journey they had started. That I don't think every election that seems to have challenges should be subjected to a by-election. Courts had started the practice of attributing blame where it lies. And in circumstances where a court can clearly, from the evidence provided, illustrate that a certain party was victorious, court can declare that party victorious and save us from the burden of spending money on that election. I think court just needs to be more serious and also needs to be bold and braver in attributing blame to those people who are involved in election offenses and election violence. That may save us from certain by-elections that are not necessary. But all in all, thank you for the presentation. There was a lot to learn.
We are taking one more because we have colleagues waiting online. Richard, I took over from you. There was some sort of a coup here when we went away. Yeah, please, make your submission, then we'll go online.
Thank you very much. Sophie Nampel from Oxfam. Thank you, Henry, for the insightful presentation. It paints a picture that is not so good, but that is where we are. And I think, yes, it's focused on the by-elections, but I know it goes, even if we are to look at the general elections of our leaders, the same could apply and might even be worse. But then, and I want to re-echo a question that was asked by one of the participants. I know with the citizenry, the situation, poverty situation that the politicians ride upon to monetize elections and the votes that they are looking for. How do we go back to the point of pulling money out of these elections? If I may use that. I know at some point money is needed, but we leave the money to be for organizing and things like that, but then the monetizing of the vote itself, how do we go to a point where that is pulled out and you get a genuine vote from a citizen for a good cause? Thank you.
Right, so we now will go online. So colleagues online, in no particular order, you will unmute and make your submission. Those that cannot do so, we will be happy to read your comments or question in the chat box.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Thanks to conversation. My name is Jean Ngovi. I do serve with Akina Mama Africa. And for me, this discussion comes very timely for us as we head for elections, looking at how we are still.
Jean, did we lose you? Sorry. Next. Okay, colleagues online, unmute and make your submission or ask your question. No, there are no hands, okay? So maybe we can go on with the responding to these questions. Yeah, I will start by thanking my brother, Professor Moses Hisa, for these very insightful points he's discussed, delivered. And I also like, I take the advice because with the two things you highlight is, one of them is that it's important to continuously monitor and document the effect of money on our elections, but also try to establish the correlation between how much is spent, establish the link between the way politics is financed and how policies are passed in Parliament, to try and establish that quid pro quo relationship that we understand. Now let me now go to the questions. I like the comments. I've recorded them. Those are going to go a long way in helping us improve the content of this paper. But there was a question about the citizens and the voters, the ones who take the matchboxes and soap and keep taking those, and they're saying election time is the only time we get to get these fellows. What do we do? So as you are making a submission on that point, I remembered the criticisms that one of the philosophers, Socrates, had on democracy. And you remember when he compared a situation where you have a sea vessel. That time there were no flights, I think there were no planes, but there were vessels. And then he said if there were two vessels, you arrive to take your journey and they tell you there are two vessels ready to take off. The first vessel, the captain of it was chosen by a bunch of everyday farmers. And so they chose from amongst themselves and they appointed one of themselves to be the captain of the vessel. And then there's another vessel where they tell you that the captain of it was appointed by those that are skilled in seafarer. Which vessel will you board? In this case, if it was a plane, they tell you the pilot of this one was elected by the everyday people, and this one, the pilot was appointed by people who are skilled in aviation. Which one do you board? Everybody said I would go for one that where the pilot or the captain was appointed or designated by those that are skilled at the craft of seafarer. Because we don't trust that those everyday people would have the capacity of even knowing the qualities of who a good captain is. And then he was saying that that is exactly what politics is. You see, identifying a candidate and electing is a skill. And therefore he was pointing to the need of citizens being educated. In the situation of Uganda, this would be civic education, so that people can be able to understand the nature and character of the electoral positions to which they are going to vote people. What do they do? So that you don't get to have someone who is very good at community development and vote them into parliament. I always made the example of the late Ssewakiryanga, who was a very good community developer. He was best elected to serve at a level where the rubber touches the ground, at local government level. So they sent him to parliament. What does he do? He goes and does community work. So why did you not vote him for community work and get somebody as accomplished and has the qualities of being a legislator and would serve in parliament? So we need to educate our people. Similarly, I think this is why they take the money. If they get to be educated, that you don't need to think that election time is a time to harvest. And we do this consistently and intentionally to educate the people. The challenge we are going to have is that we have a leader on top of the tree who is comfortable with the people sending whomever they can save, and he's interested in making sure that the people don't get educated, that they just vote whomever they can vote and he can manipulate. So this is a challenge we are having. But once we get there, which will take time, I think will be good to go. We know that democracy takes time to grow. Countries like the US, which have been practicing democracy for 200 years, are still having challenges. One man comes and demolishes everything using his executive orders. So democracy is something we shall continue to build and be able to educate. Civic education is very important. I think Maureen Nakimuli alludes to this. The Muntu needs to be educated about this. And I liked the questions Chris asked about in the cases where, and I think it also ties in with the question asked, but in the cases where the by-election, okay, the vacancy is arising out of court decision, we are proposing a number of things. The first one, that kind of mirrors what my colleague has from the Human Rights Center has said, Eric. The court can designate the next best candidate. If we've decided we are not going to go down the path of by-elections, and it's going to be not easy to sell, but we should also not be shy to propose it. Because, you know, as I was interacting with the Electoral Commission, I also learned one thing, reading between lines, is that by-elections is also a time to alleviate some level of poverty. They make some money. They need them. When they come, they harvest. So how are you going to convince them that let's rationalize? But this is an argument that is worth having. So the court would then announce the second best candidate to take over. But this is going to require an amendment in our laws. So do our laws guard against the misuse of state resources? They do. We actually have the Presidential Elections Act and also the Parliamentary Elections Act provide for, they have provisos on misuse of public resources for campaigns. They also put some limits on the president, the sitting president. I think the provision is that the sitting president should only use those facilities that are ordinarily attached to his office. But Parliament has to legislate and define what are those facilities that are ordinarily attached to his office. Parliament has never legislated on that. Yeah, but that would be one of the things. But otherwise, as it stands, there's quite a lot of misuse of state resources. How much do opposition political parties spend? We did not interest ourselves in how much they spend, but this is information we can find. Because we wanted to focus more on public resources, the burden on the taxpayer, which is why we also steered clear of how much the NRA, the ruling parties, spends on its own by-elections. We looked at only that spending that comes from the taxpayer. So the challenges of violence and the manipulation and the zombieism in elections, of course, they are not unique to by-elections. They are also common in general elections. We are going into an election now. I think the message is clear. If you are a journalist, if you want peace, do not point a camera at anyone. Any security official that is doing things that you think are not good. So the language is clear, the message is clear. So that continues to be a problem, of course. So the rest, Richard, were comments. We take them as comments. We will go back and enrich our papers. Sorry? There's one more comment online. Please unmute. Is a comment?
Let me read it for you. It says that, in my view, suspending by-elections because they are violent and expensive may not solve the political question of the day. It will only serve to enfranchise the local people. Even general elections have been the same, violent and monetized, but because they are not restricted to only one constituency, they are not easily monitored. Instead, it is the state that should, it is the state that should be argued to stop, urged, I think, to stop violence. Why should the state meet that level of violence on people?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I agree almost entirely. The reason we are arguing for rationalization is that you look at the point and you can't find it. Because if Kawempe North belonged to NOP, we go through all this hurabaloo and the spending, and then we get the same result. Why did we go there? You go to other constituencies which belong to NRM, and the NRM candidate still is the one that gets to be voted, after having taken the country through all of these pains and hassles. So I think we need to reflect on this seriously. It is an idea that we think can work. We are trying to interest as many Ugandans as possible to reflect on it. There are merits and demerits of it, of course. For example, you can speak about disenfranchisement, but I can argue that, you see, if my party got the mandate to serve for 5 years, why would that then change? Why would you not let us appoint another candidate? Because another candidate allow us to go through the same procedures we went through and appoint who the successor would be. So this is something we would continue to solicit views on, and will not be shy to put our best foot forward. Thank you, Richard.
Any more comments? We have one more round, and then we will call it a day.
Thank you, the presenter, for being elaborate on what it costs us. Though we don't have the powers to have that control over that money. There is generally there has been an illusion that civic education is going to be an antidote in terms of liberating the minds of the common person. But I don't believe that could be effective. Reason? It depends on who is doing that civic education. Even if you have so many seminars, where do you conduct those seminars, and how do people buy in those seminars? Then the other aspect of the cost, how do you control the flow of money? This money flows in cash. It does not flow from one account to the other. I don't think they can even distribute that money through mobile platforms. Even if they were to do that, those operators of the mobile platforms fear for loss of business in case they disclose how the money flowed. So how do you deal with such a case? Then if it has been common that the ruling government is the biggest spender, of course you've elaborated on where money comes from, but you've not told us, or you need to find out. I've learned that actually huge billions of money are mobilized. Then there is this group which goes to the constituency. They are a group of ministers, party members. They are the ones who control that money in billions. And what goes out to the common person is nothing but just peanuts. So at the end of a by-election, whether they lose or gain, they sit down and share those proceeds. How do we track or trace that money that has been shared by that gang that was supposed to support or promote their candidate in such a by-election? And when you look at the opposition, we would like to know, people join politics not because they want to provide a service. They join politics because they ostensibly claim there is a gap they have to fill, there is a weakness in the sitting government. But where do they get money to drive around the country contesting for elections. I highly doubt that there are individuals here in Uganda, whether private sector or not, willing to sacrifice billions of money to support the opposition. I suspect there could be some foreign powers. I may not talk about the interests, but of course interests will always be there. Even the government of the day promotes some foreign interest. So how do we try to look at the flow of such kind of money from outside the country to here, and what implications, even if it is going to the opposition? Of course, it comes to the opposition because the opposition makes promises to those foreign interests. So how do we deal with such a problem? Thank you very much.
Yes, Chris, any other? I want to see the last hands, and then I invite you for a cup of coffee.
Okay, thank you. Henry, question around the strength of the correlation between the amount of money candidates spend and the outcomes. Because I think there seems to be some evidence that the correlation is there. It might be we think that it, because we have had cases where candidates spend more money and still lose the election. The Kawempe by-election is an example, and I think also in the general elections, if you use parliamentary elections as an example, you find that 70% of the candidates that spend a lot of money still parliament. So I think there's something to investigate around that. The second point is what I think the speaker just now has mentioned around, civic education. It's very possible that our assumption that Ugandans are not necessarily rational, or that they do not make electoral decisions because they are is perhaps not as strong as we have it. Because we've seen in communities who still take the money and vote otherwise. So we have to perhaps investigate and look at the interest that they have. And then finally, I like the proposal of courts deciding to give the seat, the first runner up. But I think you can expand the argument to go to the proportional representation system. Because in that system, first of all, the amount of money used reduces significantly. Each candidate does not have to have its own budget, because the political party would have to invest its own budget to reach the voters. But also, two, if you have a party like NUP that gets, let's say, 35%, it means in your parliament, you're going to have 30% of legislators from NUP as a political party. And the party list that is submitted can change if a legislator dies or for some reason there's an issue and they would replace that particular person. I think there's maybe a bit of thought into that proposal to just move from, just having courts decide who takes the seat after there's an issue to, to a proportional representation system that would reduce the amount of money that we spend on our elections, but also to reduce the cost of by-elections, because we'd have no by-elections, especially at the parliamentary level. Yeah.
Interesting. I'll take one. Is it one more? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. On the suggestion I made around courts, that one was not meant to apply where, for instance, a candidate has died. Where a candidate has died, I totally agree with Henry around us maybe having a procedure in which the other. And I think Chris clarified currently, as we speak, the system doesn't seem to favor that kind of process, because candidates, although they represent parties, they are elected on individual merit. So if we had a system, that would be a bit different. My issue around the courts was specifically where we've had a by-election as a result of electoral fraud, malpractice, or something in that direction. Because I would not want us to encourage a party that has engaged in electoral malpractice to have the opportunity to replace their own candidate. I think they should be punished by courts, really, if they can attribute blame to them, by giving another party that came second an opportunity to take that seat up. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it looks like these are going to be interesting dynamics. But Henry, you want to say anything before we then? Okay.
Yeah, you just want to thank Chris and for that. I think we are going to tie in the element of proportional representation to make our argument strong. And I also like the idea of punishing the candidate who has participated, who has actually caused the nullification, the nullification to be punished, because that would have then caused a loss. So there's a question I had not answered of the correlation between spending and the electoral victory. So in 2021, we did the statistics because we followed the constituencies and were able to document high spenders and whether the spending translated into electoral victory. We eliminated the central region. In the central region, all the candidates that were elected in 2021 were actually not the leading spenders. Most of the big spenders lost. I think the only constituency where the big spender won will have been the constituency of Sebamala in Bukoto South. But for many of the others, they did not win. But in the rest of the country, Eastern, Western, and Northern, in 87% of the cases, the candidate that spent more was also the one that was declared winner. So these two dynamics happened. And understanding, so the point you raise of how do you control the flow of money? Some of the money we use in Uganda, for example, we don't use the electronic system of transferring, of doing these electoral expenditures, so you can't track it. Most of the money is carried in sacks. The 1 billion, for example, I spoke about that the Prime Minister went into Kawempe with, but also went into Bunyoro with. It was not electronic, it was in cash. So how do you track that? I think we need to amend our laws, because what we are grappling with is an issue that other countries have found a solution to. We need to include provisions that require disclosure of sources of monies and how much you're going to spend. It's only the requirement to disclose where the money came from that can help you to know whether the money, to put a check on that money that enters politics. Otherwise, it is very difficult to track. Money is money. Even the one who is tracking can be compromised because money is money. So it's a situation where even those developed democracies are still grappling with the element of money. You saw how Elon Musk made the biggest contribution to the US, to Trump's election, and you can see the influence he's having. And everybody understands that this man is using purchased influence, but they cannot figure out how can we address this situation to avoid the recurrence of the same in the future. So I think through these conversations, and thanks Richard CBR for organizing these, we may eventually arrive at a solution that can mitigate some of these challenges. Thank you very much. I end it here.
Well, thank you very much, Henry, for sort of jogging our minds on this issue of money and elections. I think one of the points you made as you are ending, even in those jurisdictions globally where we think money has no huge influence, right now some of us are victims of decisions of those with money and how they sort of influenced elections. And probably this is now a bigger discussion, Henry, that you need to have, which is to say that maybe, yes, there is this little matchbox buying, waraji buying, and all that happens. But then there is the larger money and how it influences actual policy direction, both locally and globally. And with the rise of transactional politics globally, because we see that that is what is happening, that there is a rise of transactional politics. Countries are being asked the question, what are you bringing to the table? It's now economic diplomacy and not, this other woolly diplomacy of human rights and liking each other and, So I think that in itself means that even how democracy gets practiced is going to be fundamentally shifting. So for me, I think that as we think about our local issue, the localized money by-elections, we have to keep our eye on the global processes and how they are influencing the way money influences elections. Because I can imagine that if I was a billionaire and I live in Uganda and I see how that billionaire in America got an office at the White House, it might be attractive, you see, for me to invest heavily to also get my office. So it's possible. Or to make sure that I am second row on the swearing in, meaning that when the swearing in is over, there are many things that can happen. So I guess that for me, the issue around money is like it has created that new ways of thinking about how those who are Kisa called oligarchs are attracted to politics. Because there was a time when rich people would say, that is useless. But now they have found out that actually we can buy politics. It is a commodity that we can buy if we pop up a guy who is on our side. And when you look even in countries like, for example, Europe and others who have moved to the left or to the right, you realize that the candidates in there are very much about economics. We want to develop our people. We want money here. We will talk with those with money. So the privatization of politics and the commercialization and the commoditization, seems to be both a local problem but also a global one. So I guess that for me, that's one thing that comes out of this. But I think what you have helped us to paint is that we need to push for alternatives. One is rationalization. Probably creating new legal regimes may not help as much, but creating a different culture may help. And I think from what you say, it is clear that probably even when you make the calculations, it's no longer a very easy and wise investment to put a lot of money in elections. Because if I'm going to buy my vote for 1 billion, how much is an MP paid highest per month? 40 million. Yeah? Okay, if you add and is getting 60 million, and then in a year, how much will that be? You will have about, 360? Or is it 3.6 billion? But when you count, and then you also know that you have to constantly service the electorate, you will not just take away, buy them once. You have to buy them through the 5 years. You find that the net profit that you are left with may be very, very low. for any politician. So I think that in itself is important. But I think the point that has been made about us studying this question empirically is a good one, to sort of see what dimensions you want to look at. There is the dimension of what is spent, how much reaches people, for example, those who have spent and lost, what happens to them, and all those other dimensions. So I guess that for me, what you have done for us is to add another important dimension in understanding elections. And of course, when we think about 2026 and what we need to do as a country, one of the issues we need to deal with is this. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for turning up and for listening. Those online, thank you very much for also logging in. We keep these conversations not too public, like we don't want a grand style discussion, but we wanted a focused discussion. Why? Because we think we need to find things that we must dig deeper on. And sometimes an afternoon like this helps us to see what are the diversities of dimensions we're investing in. So with that, we want to thank you for spending your afternoon in this very noise-laden place. And I think, I think noise is everywhere in Uganda. I'm now starting to wonder if we should have a regulation on noise, but you can hear every machine is, so we thank you for spending some time with us here. We have some coffee and tea. Please have a cup of coffee and tea before you hit the road. We will be having another seminar next month. We'll let you know what we shall be talking about. With the young people at Open Space, we shall also be continuing a bit of their discussion around young people in another initiative. But with that, you are all welcome to have a cup of tea, and thank you very much for coming for this seminar this afternoon. Once again, thank you. We want a group photo, so all of you come in the front. That is according to these young people who want photos of everybody. So please come, and we stand here next to the ACFIM. We remove this podium, yeah? Yes. There are many. There was one which we gave you. Please come to the front right here and join us, all of us here. Where? We should be this side. So you are going to get this and put it on the back. Yeah, then you need that banner to find a way of carrying the banner. Anthony.